Alright, today we're going to do something called conditionals. And conditionals, I think, is very, very simple. At least the ones that SAT tests you on, because they only test you on the four basic conditionals, and thankfully not on the mixed conditionals, which can get really, really hairy. But what conditionals are basically they're if clauses, or some people call it if statements. Okay, and they're fairly simple. All you have to do is follow certain rules. So there's something called conditional zero. It starts from zero for some odd reason. I know some people like to put one, but it actually starts from zero. And conditional zero are is for facts. Okay, facts. So I'll give you an example sentence. I think this is the easiest way to understand it. So if you heat water to if you heat water to 100 C Celsius, what happens? It boils. Okay? And what you need to pay attention to is simply the verbs. Okay? Simply the verbs. And the verb over here is in what tense? This has to do with verb tenses. What tense? It's in the present tense, right? You heat water, right? It's in the present tense. And then this part is in also the present tense, right? So, conditional zero or if statement zero just deals with facts, right? But it's not. I'll explain this later. But you could, change these. You could write the same sentence with different conditionals, right? So let's check out conditional number one. And conditional number one is usually for likely events. Okay. What do I mean by that? I'll give you an example. If you study, you will pass. Meaning, if you study, then you have a good chance of passing, right? And will pass is almost a certainty over here, right? In conditional one, you should use over here, you study is also the present tense, but this one, as you notice, is different, is you will pass. So this should be in the future, okay? Now let's look at conditional number two. Two is for unlikely, but possible events. Okay. Now, is it likely or unlikely to win the lottery? It's can you win the lottery? And a lot of times when I ask this question, some people say no, you can't. But that makes no sense because if nobody won the lottery, they wouldn't play, right? And if you notice something, that sentence I just said is basically conditional number two, right? So I'll give you an example. If I won the lottery, I would buy a new car. Okay? So, what's the verb tense in this one? This one is in the past, right? Conditional two is in the past. And would buy, this is an auxiliary or modal verb, right? Would, could, should, and buy, right? So this is what you need to do. You need to put the auxiliary plus a present tense form of the word, right? So if I won the lottery, I would buy a car. What about another one? Let's do another example. So if I heard him, I would listen, right? But you didn't hear him, so you couldn't, right? These kind of have to do with a lot of people actually use it for hypothetical situations, but what you need to check for is on the SATs, if you see would, right? Usually they give you would. Check if this verb matches over here. Check if this verb matches, because a lot of times they give you something else. Okay? And the last one, conditional number three. Okay? Conditional number three is for impossible events. And I'm not saying they're completely impossible, but it's impossible because of time. And what do I mean by that? It means something passed. Something happened already, so you can't do anything about it. So I'll give you an example. If I had known the lottery numbers, I would have won. Okay? Now think about this. You can't win now because the lottery is already over, right? That's what I mean by impossible, right? Because of time. It already happened in the past. And the verb tenses over here is had known, right? Had is the past perfect form, okay? With this past participle. Remember that, right? It's the past perfect with auxiliary plus present perfect. And if you have no, if you're daunted by the jargon meaning technical terms that I'm using, look it up. These are some of the most basic things you need to know to improve on other parts, right? So the sentence structure you should use is had known or had something, past participle, and then would, could, should, and then present perfect. Okay. SAT usually tests you on conditional 2 and 3. They usually test you on these the most, the last two that I just mentioned. Do they mention the other ones? Yes, but I've only seen maybe a handful from the Blue Book and the QAS that they release, right? So, one more thing that I want to mention with this is that since these are clauses, what can you do with them? You could swap them around. You can do, I would have won if I had known the lottery numbers. Okay, sometimes they'll write it in this form. The if clause, dependent clause over here, is actually added in the back. Because they're clauses, you can swap them back and forth, right? Remember that. Okay, now one last thing that I want to do is that sometimes they give you abridged versions of sentences. Abridged meaning shortened. Okay, so you could also write had I known, right? Had I known, I would have won. This is exactly the same as the previous sentence, except it's just written in abbreviated form, right? I'm assuming this is probably from older English, right? But you could use this phrase. Check for this verb tense over here, and see if that matches on the questions on the SATs, right? Alright, so let's look at this question. It says, if you can acquire the needed calories by ingesting corn ethanol gasoline instead of by consuming food, you would be able to swim 10 kilometers on about a liter of gasoline, or ethanol gas. Okay, so you could check, remember always do the subject and verb, but this one I think you could easily check that, or easily notice that it's a conditional question. How can you know? Because it starts with if over here. Whoops. Let's see. It starts with if over here. Oh, that's orange today. So what is this a clause or a phrase? I think that's one of the first things that you need to identify. It says if you can acquire the necessary calories. So if you take out if, you know that this is a clause, right? So it's a dependent clause. Okay. And then this is an independent clause. You would be able to swim. Okay, so that's the sentence structure. Now, since that's correct, you can check if the pronouns match. This one says you and this one says you, so that's not wrong. Okay, what is wrong is actually really difficult to catch. A lot of kids miss this, but the answer to this question is A. This part does not match with the independent clause over here. It says you would be able to swim 10 kilometers. Right? And if you remember the lessons on conditionals, you know this, has to match with could, because this is, I believe, the second conditional, right? The one where I said, if you won the lotto, you would do something, right? So let's say, for instance, if I won the lotto, I would buy a car, right? These are hypothetical situations, and in this case this is not real. I know can, you could have the past tense of can is could, but it's not saying you drank the gasoline in the past, right? That makes no sense. So this one, it has to be a hypothetical could. I know could means a likely situation as opposed to would, which is really unlikely, but in this case it would be if you could acquire the necessary calories, then you would be able to swim. Okay, so the answer is A.